For 8 years, the boy touched his ear. Every doctor said the same thing. Nothing we can do. His father spent millions, flew across the world, begged specialists to look again. They all shrugged. Then I noticed something no one else did, and what I found inside that child's ear would leave you speechless. I wasn't looking to change anyone's life when I walked through those imposing iron gates. I was just trying to survive. My name is Victoria Diaz, and at 27, I wasn't supposed to be scrubbing floors in a mansion. I was supposed to have a degree, a career, a future that didn't involve serving the wealthy. But life has its own plans. My grandmother's medical bills had piled up like autumn leaves, threatening to bury us both. The nursing home had given me 3 weeks' notice, pay or she'd be transferred to a state facility. The kind of place where people go to die alone. So when the employment agency called about a cleaning position at the Hart estate, I didn't hesitate. The pay was triple what I'd make anywhere else. I didn't care about the rumors that Oliver Hart was impossible to work for, that staff turnover was higher than the mansion's spires, that the place felt more like a mausoleum than a home. I just needed that paycheck. Mrs. Patterson met me at the service entrance, her face as starched as her uniform. "You'll clean," she said, eyes measuring me like I was a piece of furniture that might not fit. "You'll stay quiet. You'll keep to yourself." Mr. Hart doesn't like disruptions, especially around his son. I nodded, clutching my small bag of cleaning supplies. "I understand, Do you?" Her eyebrows arched. "Because the last girl didn't. She tried to get too friendly with the boy. Thought she could help." Her voice dropped to a whisper. She was gone within a week. A chill ran down my spine. "I'm just here to work," I assured her. But as she led me through corridors of marble and mahogany, I couldn't help noticing the silence. Not the peaceful kind. Not the kind that feels like rest. This silence was heavy, thick, like something had died and no one had buried it yet. The servants moved like ghosts, eyes down, steps silent. And then I saw him, the small boy sitting cross-legged on the grand staircase, arranging toy cars in a perfect line. He didn't look up as we passed, didn't acknowledge our presence. But what caught my attention was the way he kept touching his right ear, a subtle wince crossing his face each time. "That's the young master," Mrs. Patterson murmured. "Shaw Hart. Born deaf. Mr. Hart has spent a fortune trying to fix him." I flinched at her words. Fix him? Like he was a broken appliance. "The doctors say it's congenital," she continued. "Nothing to be done. Best not to interact with him. Mr. Hart doesn't like false hope." I nodded again, but something stirred inside me. I'd seen that look before, that wince of pain. It reminded me of my cousin, the one everyone thought would never hear. Until they found. "Your quarters are this way," Mrs. Patterson interrupted my thoughts, leading me to a small room on the 3rd floor. That night, I lay on the narrow bed, staring at the ceiling. The grandeur of the mansion couldn't hide the sorrow that permeated its walls. I thought about Shaw, alone in his silent world, and about Oliver Hart, a man who could buy anything except what he wanted most. My grandmother always said God doesn't place us somewhere by accident. "Pay attention," she'd tell me. "Sometimes your purpose finds you when you're looking for something else entirely." Days passed as I settled into the rhythm of the house. I cleaned floors, dusted priceless artwork, polished silver that probably cost more than everything I'd ever owned. But my eyes kept finding Shaw. He spent most mornings in the sunroom, surrounded by model airplanes and puzzles, alone in his carefully constructed world. I watched him touch his ear again and again, that same wince flickering across his face. One morning, I was assigned to clean the sunroom while he was there. I worked quietly, careful not to disturb him. But when I saw him struggling with a model airplane wing, his small fingers unable to snap the piece into place, I couldn't stop myself. I knelt beside him, gently took the wing, and fitted it into place with a soft click. He looked up, startled by my presence. For a moment, we just stared at each other. His eyes were the same deep blue as the photographs of his mother that hung throughout the house, the woman who died bringing him into this world. Then something happened. The tiniest smile, just a flicker at the corner of his mouth. I smiled back and gave him a small wave. He waved in return. That simple interaction changed everything. The next day, I left a folded paper crane on the staircase where he liked to sit. I didn't wait to see if he would take it. But the following morning, it was gone. In its place was a note, 2 words in shaky handwriting, "Thank you." We developed our own silent language after that. Small gifts, secret smiles. I learned his personal signs, not the formal ones his tutors taught, but the ones he'd created himself. The way he tapped his chest twice meant he was happy. The way he pointed to the sky meant he was thinking about stars. The way he pressed both palms together meant he felt safe. And I noticed something else, something dark in his ear canal, visible only when the light hit it just right. Something that shouldn't be there. Mrs. Patterson caught me watching him one evening. "I've warned you," she hissed. "Mr. Hart has rules. Staff doesn't get close to Shaw." "I'm not trying to cause trouble," I whispered. You're here to clean, not to mother that child, not to fix what can't be fixed." Her eyes narrowed. "If Mr. Hart finds out, you'll be gone. No references, no second chances." That night, I sat on my bed, torn between fear and certainty. I needed this job. My grandmother needed me. But Shaw needed someone to truly see him, not as a problem to be solved or a tragedy to be managed, but as a child in pain. What I glimpsed in his ear haunted me. What if everyone was wrong? What if he wasn't born deaf at all? I didn't know it then, but my decision would change 3 lives forever, Shaw's, Oliver's, and my own. Because sometimes the smallest actions create the biggest miracles. If you've ever felt like you were placed somewhere for a greater purpose, I'd love to hear your story in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel. Follow this journey. The next morning came with a heaviness I couldn't shake. I moved through my duties like a sleepwalker, dusting shelves that didn't need dusting, polishing silver that already gleamed. My mind was elsewhere, on Shaw, on what I glimpsed in his ear, on the impossible choice before me. I found him in the library that afternoon, seated cross-legged on a Persian rug worth more than my grandmother's medical bills. Books lay open around him, their pages filled with photographs of airplanes and distant galaxies. He couldn't hear the words, but the images spoke to him. When he noticed me, his hands moved rapidly. Not formal sign language, but his personal dialect of gestures. His own voice in a silent world. "Yes, I like space too," I signed back, using the mixture of formal signs and his invented ones we'd developed. He patted the rug beside him. I hesitated, glancing over my shoulder. Mrs. Patterson's warning echoed in my mind. But something stronger pulled me forward, the memory of my cousin. I sat beside Shaw, our shoulders nearly touching. Up close, I could see the dark circles under his eyes. Had he been sleeping? His right ear was red around the edges, inflamed. "Does it hurt?" I signed, pointing gently. His eyes widened. No one had asked him that before. After a moment's hesitation, he nodded. "Always?" I asked. He shook his head, then held up 3 fingers. 3 days. Another head shake. "Weeks?" "No" again. "Months?" He nodded vigorously. My stomach tightened. 3 months of pain, and no one had noticed, or worse, they'd noticed and dismissed it as something he should simply endure. "May I look?" I signed. Fear flashed across his face. He'd been examined by countless doctors, subjected to procedures that promised hope but delivered only disappointment. Why should he trust me, a maid with no credentials beyond my own conviction? I didn't push. Instead, I pulled out my phone and showed him a photograph, my cousin Marcus at his high school graduation, proudly holding his diploma. "My cousin," I signed. Everyone thought he would never hear. For 6 years, he lived in silence. Then someone found something in his ear. Shaw's eyes fixed on the picture, hungry for hope. Now he hears everything, I continued. Sometimes too much. I smiled, trying to keep my signs light, casual. He complains about our grandmother's television being too loud. Shaw touched the screen, then touched his own ear. His question was clear. Yes, I nodded. Like you, maybe. Hope is a dangerous thing to offer a child who's been disappointed so many times. But the alternative, saying nothing, doing nothing, felt like a betrayal worse than false promise. That evening, I skipped dinner and went to the mansion's library. I needed information, understanding. The Heart Library contained medical texts that would make a university jealous. I found what I needed: detailed anatomies of the ear, descriptions of blockages, case studies of misdiagnosed deafness. With each page, my certainty grew. What I glimpsed in Shaw's ear wasn't normal. It wasn't congenital. It was something else entirely. My grandmother's voice seemed to whisper from the pages, God doesn't always send help in fancy packages. Sometimes he sends it through folks with nothing but willing hands. I closed the book, heart pounding. My hands were willing. But was I brave enough to use them? The next morning, I found a note slipped under my door, clumsy handwriting on expensive stationery. My ear hurts bad. Can you help? Please don't tell Father. I pressed the note to my chest, eyes closing briefly. The desperation in those words felt like a physical weight. I found Shaw in his playroom, assembling a jigsaw puzzle with mechanical precision. When he saw me, relief washed over his features. He immediately pointed to his ear. The redness had spread. Whatever was inside was causing inflammation. I knelt beside him, tilting his head toward the light from the window. There it was, more visible now than before. A dark mass, dense and foreign, lodged deep in his ear canal. Not wax, not a growth, something that didn't belong there, something that had been missed by doctors too focused on congenital conditions to consider simpler explanations. I see it, I signed slowly. I think I can help. But I need to tell your father. Panic erupted across his face. His hands flew in frantic gestures, no doctors. They hurt. Never help. My heart cracked. 8 years of specialists, 8 years of painful procedures, 8 years of hope followed by crushing disappointment. He'd learned that help meant suffering without relief. I took his small hands in mine. Not doctors, I signed. Just me. But I need your father's permission. Shaw shook his head so violently I feared he'd hurt himself. Father angry. Always angry when I can't hear. The heartbreak of that statement stole my breath. Oliver Hart's frustration wasn't with his son, it was with his own helplessness, his inability to fix what was broken. But an 8-year-old couldn't understand that distinction. He only felt the disappointment, the distance, the despair. I'll find a way, I promised. Trust me. He signed trust back to me, both palms pressed together, then opened like a book. It was the most precious gift he could give. That night, I paced my small room until the floorboards creaked in protest. My options were clear but impossible: approach Oliver Hart directly, and likely be fired for overstepping, do nothing, and leave Shaw in pain, or take matters into my own hands, and risk everything. I pulled out my phone and called the only person who might understand, my grandmother. The connection was poor, her voice weaker than I remembered, but her wisdom remained sharp. I could lose this job, Nana, I whispered. And if I'm wrong? Child, she interrupted, sometimes doing right doesn't feel safe. That boy is suffering while people who should help him look away. What does your heart tell you? That I can help him, I admitted. That I should try. Then you have your answer. Her voice softened. The Good Samaritan didn't have credentials either, but he stopped when others walked by. After hanging up, I pulled out the small first aid kit I'd brought from home. Inside were alcohol swabs, gauze, and a pair of sterilized tweezers I'd kept since my cousin's ordeal. I cleaned them again, hands trembling. The next morning, I heard that Oliver Hart would be leaving for a business trip, 3 days in Tokyo. 3 days when the mansion would operate with skeleton staff. 3 days when decisions would be made by housekeepers, not billionaires. 3 days when I might find the courage to act. As I watched Oliver's helicopter lift from the private pad, Shaw stood at his bedroom window, small hand pressed against the glass, watching his father leave again. The loneliness radiating from that small figure strengthened my resolve. That afternoon, Mrs. Patterson assembled the staff in the kitchen. "Mr. Hart will return Thursday evening," she announced. "Until then, maintain regular schedules. The tutor will come for young masters' lessons tomorrow. Otherwise, minimal disruptions." Her eyes landed on me. Minimal interactions. I nodded obediently, but inside, a decision had solidified. The tweezers felt heavy in my pocket. If Shaw showed signs of pain again, I would act. I would trust what God had shown me, even if it cost me everything. I didn't have to wait long. That evening, as I was folding linens in the East Wing, a sound froze my blood, a muffled thump, then silence. I dropped the sheets and ran toward the sound. In the dimly lit hallway, Shaw lay curled on the floor, both hands pressed against his right ear, face contorted in silent agony. Tears streamed down his cheeks, soundless suffering, the worst kind. I fell to my knees beside him, gathering his small body into my arms. His skin burned with fever. The infection had worsened. It was time. No more waiting, no more hesitation. As I reached for the tweezers in my pocket, a prayer rose from my heart: "Lord, guide my hands." What happened next would either save this child or destroy us both. If you've ever had to make a difficult choice when everything was at stake, share your experience in the comments. And please subscribe to this channel. The weight of the tweezers in my palm felt like lead as I knelt beside Shaw's trembling body. The mansion silence pressed in around us, broken only by his ragged breathing and my whispered prayers. "I'm going to help you," I signed with one shaking hand. "It might hurt for just a moment, but then the pain will stop. I promise." His tear-streaked face looked up at me, eyes wide with equal parts terror and trust. He nodded once, permission granted from a child who'd never been given choices about his own body. I positioned him with his head tilted toward the light, my fingers gentle against his fever-hot skin. The dark mass was clearly visible now, swollen and angry, pressing against the delicate tissue of his ear canal. My stomach clenched. How had so many specialists missed this? How had so many expensive machines failed to see what was plainly before my eyes? "Stay very still," I whispered, though he couldn't hear me. The words were more for my benefit than his. I steadied my right hand with my left and carefully inserted the sterilized tweezers into his ear canal. His body went rigid, but he didn't pull away. The tweezers touched the mass, something dense and foreign. I felt resistance as I gently closed the metal tips around it. "Please, God," I breathed. "Please help me." With the slightest pressure, I began to pull. The object moved slightly, then caught. Shaw winced, his small hands clutching at my sleeve. I paused, giving him a moment, then continued with the gentlest traction. Suddenly, something gave way. The resistance vanished, and the dark mass slid free, emerging on the tweezer's tips. I stared at it in disbelief, a dense, compacted foreign object, not wax, not growth, but something that had no business being in a human ear. Years of build-up around what looked like a small piece of silicone, perhaps from an earbud or hearing protection, likely inserted when he was a toddler and forgotten, growing more impacted with each passing year. But I had no time to analyze it further, because Shaw gasped. Not a silent gasp. An audible, unmistakable intake of breath that cut through the hallway's stillness like lightning. His hands flew to his ears, both ears, and his eyes grew impossibly wide. His mouth opened in shock as sound rushed into his world for the very first time. "Shaw," I whispered. His head snapped toward my voice, a voice he'd never heard before this moment. Tears filled his eyes, different tears than before. Wonder tears. Miracle tears. "You can hear me," I said, my own voice breaking. He nodded frantically, touching his throat, feeling the vibration. His mouth worked, struggling to form words he'd never spoken aloud. S sound, he finally managed, the word rough and unpracticed but unmistakable. Joy exploded through me like a supernova. I pulled him into my arms, sobbing against his hair as he trembled with the overwhelming sensations of a world suddenly filled with noise. The clock ticking on the wall. The distant hum of the air conditioning. My heartbeat against his ear. Yes, baby, I whispered. That sound. You can hear. His small body shook with emotion as he pulled back, touching my lips with wondering fingers, connecting the movements to the sounds they made for the first time. Say something else, he begged, the words slurred but understandable. Your name is Shaw Hart, I said clearly, watching his face transform with each syllable. And you are the bravest boy I've ever known. He repeated his name, feeling it in his mouth, hearing it in his ears. Shaw. Then, with a sudden urgency, he looked around wildly. Father? Where? He's away, I explained, helping him to his feet. He'll be back soon. Shaw looked down at the object I'd removed, still balanced on the tweezers. That made me not hear. I nodded. It was blocking everything. Like a door that was locked shut. He touched his ear again, wonderment replacing pain. No more doctors? We should still have a doctor check you, I said gently. But not the same ones. New doctors. We needed to call someone, a medical professional, to verify what had happened, to ensure there was no damage. But first, I needed to document everything. I carefully placed the extracted object in a clean tissue and took several photos with my phone. Evidence of what had been missed for 8 long years. Victoria, Shaw said, my name on his lips for the first time. Thank you. The simple phrase, spoken aloud rather than signed, undid me completely. I knelt down to his level, holding his small hands in mine. You were always meant to hear, I told him. Always. We were so absorbed in our miracle that we didn't notice the approaching footsteps until it was too late. What is going on here? Mrs. Patterson's voice sliced through our bubble of joy. She stood at the end of the hallway, face draining of color as she took in the scene, me kneeling beside Shaw, tweezers in one hand, the extracted object in the other, and most damning of all, Shaw responding to sounds. He can hear, I said simply, rising to my feet. There was a blockage in his ear canal. I removed it. Her mouth opened and closed several times before she found words. You did what? The horror in her voice matched the fury in her eyes. You performed a medical procedure on Oliver Hart's son? Without permission? Without qualifications? I helped him, I countered, standing my ground. Look at him. Listen to him. He can hear. Mrs. Patterson stared at Shaw, who was turning in slow circles, head tilted as he absorbed the cacophony of a world he'd never experienced before. Clock, he said, pointing to the grandfather clock. Tick. Tick. For a moment, something like wonder crossed her face, but it quickly hardened back into outrage. This changes nothing, she hissed. You overstepped. You could have harmed him. You could have. But I didn't, I interrupted. I helped when everyone else failed him. She stepped toward me, finger jabbing the air. You're fired. Immediately. Pack your things. And believe me, Mr. Hart will be pressing charges. Shaw suddenly inserted himself between us, his small body vibrating with emotion. No, he shouted, truly shouted, his voice louder than he intended, unused to controlling its volume. She helped me. She made the hurt stop. Mrs. Patterson flinched at the volume but didn't back down. Young master, you don't understand. This woman could have seriously injured you. What she did was dangerous, Anne. Call my father. Shaw demanded, his first full sentence delivered with such force that both Mrs. Patterson and I took a step back. Call him now. The housekeeper's face paled further. Oliver Hart had standing orders never to be disturbed during international business trips. But this, a medical emergency involving his son, perpetrated by staff, surely qualified as an exception. Security, she called sharply, and two men appeared almost instantly, as if they'd been hovering just out of sight. Escort Ms. Diaz to her room. She is not to leave until Mr. Hart returns. As the guards approached, shock clung to my hand. No. Don't take her. It's okay, I told him, kneeling again to meet his eyes. I'm not leaving the house. Your father will understand when he sees you can hear. But as the security personnel led me away, doubt crept in. Would Oliver Hart see a miracle, or would he only see a servant who had touched his precious son without permission? Would he recognize healing, or would he only see liability? As I was escorted upstairs, I heard Shaw's voice echo through the marble hallway, calling my name. The sound of his voice, a voice that had been trapped in silence for 8 years, gave me courage. Whatever came next, that sound was worth it. That miracle was worth everything. Have you ever taken a risk because you believed in something when everyone else had given up? Share your story in the comments. And subscribe to this channel if you haven't. For 24 hours, I was a prisoner in my own room. Outside my door stood a security guard, his presence a constant reminder of my uncertain fate. Mrs. Patterson had confiscated my phone, my evidence of what I'd found in Shaw's ear, and even the tweezers I'd used. But they couldn't confiscate the truth. Through the thin walls, I heard the commotion that followed. Doctors called in the middle of the night. Urgent conversations in hushed tones. And most beautifully, Shaw's voice, sometimes too loud, sometimes barely audible, as he discovered what his own words sounded like. I sat on my narrow bed, alternating between prayer and planning. My grandmother's nursing home bill still loomed. Without this job, without a reference, finding new employment would be nearly impossible. If Oliver Hart decided to press charges for practicing medicine without a license, I pushed the thought away. God hadn't brought me this far to abandon me now. Morning came with a sharp knock on my door. Mrs. Patterson entered, her face a mask of controlled fury. Mr. Hart's helicopter will land in 20 minutes, she announced. He wants to see you immediately upon arrival. I nodded, smoothing my uniform with trembling hands. How is Shaw? Her mouth tightened. The young master is with the specialists Mr. Hart arranged. And? Can he still hear? Something flickered across her face, uncertainty, perhaps even shame. That's not your concern anymore. But it was. It was the only concern that mattered. I followed her downstairs to the grand foyer, where the staff had assembled in a tense line. Through the massive windows, I saw the helicopter descending onto the manicured lawn, its rotors churning the morning mist into swirling phantoms. Remember your place, Mrs. Patterson hissed before taking her position at the head of the line. My place. For the past weeks, my place had been invisible, cleaning, serving, fading into the background. But I had stepped out of that place to see what everyone else had missed, to do what no one else had dared. Whatever happened next, I wouldn't regret that choice. The main doors swung open, and Oliver Hart strode in. I'd seen him before, of course, glimpses of him moving through hallways, brief encounters as he passed the rooms I cleaned. But this was different. His presence filled the space like a thunderstorm, electric, unpredictable, dangerous. His eye scanned the assembled staff until they found me. I expected anger, but what I saw was something more complex. Exhaustion. Confusion. And something else I couldn't name. Where is he? He demanded, ignoring the staff's murmured greetings. In the East Wing sitting room, sir, Mrs. Patterson answered. With Dr. Mitchell. Without another word, he headed toward the East Wing. Mrs. Patterson followed, gesturing for me to do the same. The walk felt endless. My heartbeat echoed in my ears, drowning out the sound of our footsteps on the marble floor. I prepared my defense, my explanation, but what words could justify what I'd done in the eyes of a man who had spent millions on specialists who had all failed? We entered the sitting room to find Shaw sitting beside an older doctor, engaged in what appeared to be a hearing test. The boy's face lit up when he saw his father. "Dad," he exclaimed, the words still awkward but unmistakable. "I can hear you. I can hear everything." Oliver froze, his hand gripping the doorframe as if it were the only solid thing in a world suddenly turned liquid. The sound of his son's voice, calling him Dad out loud for the first time, seemed to physically strike him. He staggered slightly, then moved forward as if pulled by an invisible force. He knelt before Shaw, hands hovering over his son's shoulders, afraid to touch him, afraid this might be a dream. "Say something else," he whispered. Shaw reached out, touching his father's face with wonder. "Your voice is deeper than I thought," he said slowly. "It sounds important." Oliver made a sound, half laugh, half sob, and pulled Shaw into his arms, holding him with a desperation that made my own eyes fill with tears. For a long moment, they remained that way, locked in an embrace that bridged 8 years of silence. Finally, Oliver looked up at the doctor. "How?" he demanded. "How is this possible?" Dr. Mitchell, a distinguished man with silver hair and kind eyes, cleared his throat. "Your son had a foreign body deeply impacted in his ear canal, Mr. Hart. It appears to have been there for many years, possibly since he was very young. The object itself was surrounded by compacted material that completely blocked sound transmission. But the scans," Oliver began, "were misinterpreted," the doctor finished. "Or perhaps the focus was so firmly on congenital causes that a simple blockage was overlooked." He hesitated. "It happens more often than the medical community would like to admit." Oliver's face darkened. "Are you telling me my son spent 8 years in silence because doctors didn't look in his ear properly?" "I'm saying," Dr. Mitchell replied carefully, "that sometimes we miss the forest for the trees. Your son's case was complex, and when multiple specialists reached the same conclusion, it became accepted truth." "And yet," Oliver said, his voice dangerously soft, "a maid saw what teams of specialists missed." He turned to me, his eyes boring into mine. "Why? Why did you look when no one else did?" The question hung in the air between us. I could feel Mrs. Patterson's warning glare, the doctor's curious gaze, Shaw's hopeful expression. But I only saw Oliver, a father whose world had just been simultaneously destroyed and rebuilt. Because I saw his pain, I answered simply. He kept touching his ear, wincing. No one seemed to notice, but I had a cousin with the same symptoms who'd been misdiagnosed for years. When I looked more closely, I could see something wasn't right. "So you decided to remove it yourself?" His tone was unreadable. I straightened my shoulders. "He was in agony that night, Mr. Hart. Fever. Infection. The blockage had swollen and was pressing against his ear canal. I made a decision based on what I knew, what I'd seen with my cousin, and what I believed God was telling me to do." "God?" Oliver's eyebrow raised slightly. "You think God told you to perform a medical procedure on my son?" Before I could answer, Shaw moved to stand beside me, his small hand finding mine. "She helped me when everyone else just looked at papers and machines," he said, his speech improving with each sentence. "She made the hurting stop." Oliver's gaze moved between us, and I saw something shift in his expression, a softening, a recognition of something deeper than professional boundaries and legal liability. "The object," he said finally. "What was it?" I looked to Mrs. Patterson, who reluctantly produced the evidence bag containing what I'd removed from Shaw's ear. The doctor examined it, turning it over with a pair of forceps. "It appears to be a piece of silicone earbud tip," he confirmed. "Likely broken off in early childhood and then built upon over years. The body treated it as a foreign invader, encapsulating it with material that eventually completely blocked the canal." Oliver took the bag, staring at the tiny object that had stolen 8 years of his son's life, that had cost millions in useless treatments, that had deepened the grief of losing his wife because their son would never hear her name spoken aloud. Such a small thing to cause so much pain. When he looked up, his eyes were wet. "Everyone else was wrong," he said, more to himself than to us. "Everyone with degrees and credentials and reputations. And you, he turned to me, you were right. I waited for what would come next, gratitude or rage, forgiveness or punishment. With billionaires, you never knew which way the wind would blow. Dad, Shaw said, pulling on his father's sleeve. Don't make Victoria leave. Please. She's my friend. Oliver looked at his son, truly looked at him, perhaps for the first time seeing not a problem to solve but a child with his own will, his own voice. Then he turned to Mrs. Patterson. Leave us, he ordered. The housekeeper hesitated. Sir, about the legal implications. I said leave us. His tone left no room for argument. As the door closed behind Mrs. Patterson and the doctor, I stood alone before Oliver Hart, with only Shaw as my witness and defender. Whatever came next would determine not just my fate, but possibly the relationship between father and son for years to come. Oliver's next words would change everything. Has someone ever seen something in you that everyone else missed? Or have you been the one to notice what others overlooked? Share your story in the comments. And subscribe now to this channel if you haven't. The silence between us felt different now, expectant rather than empty. Oliver Hart stood before me, power and vulnerability battling in his eyes as Shaw's small hand remained firmly clasped in mine. You could have killed him, Oliver said finally, his voice low. You must understand that. I met his gaze without flinching. Yes. I understood the risk. Then why? Why would you gamble with my son's life? Your career? Your freedom? I glanced down at Shaw, who was watching us intently, absorbing every word, every nuance of tone that had been lost to him for 8 years. This conversation would shape his understanding of courage, of right and wrong, of what it means to stand up for someone who cannot stand for themselves. Mr. Hart, I said carefully, have you ever loved someone so much that the fear of losing them becomes secondary to the fear of failing them? Something flickered across his face, recognition, perhaps. He looked at his son, and I knew he was thinking of his wife, of promises whispered to her as she slipped away. My grandmother raised me after my parents died, I continued. When I was 11, she became everything to me: a mother, father, teacher, protector. Now she's in a nursing home, bills piling up, and I'm all she has. I took a deep breath. I took this job for her. But when I saw Shaw in pain, when I recognized what everyone else had missed, I couldn't walk away, even knowing what it might cost me. Oliver's jaw tightened. So you're saying it was worth risking my son's life to keep your job? No, I replied firmly. I'm saying some things matter more than security. More than safety. More than rules. I looked directly into his eyes. You know this. You've spent 8 years and millions of dollars fighting for your son's hearing. Would you have stopped at anything if you'd known what was truly wrong? He didn't answer, but he didn't need to. We both knew the truth. Shaw tugged on his father's sleeve. She made me better, Dad. No one else did. Oliver knelt down to his son's level. I know, buddy. But what she did was dangerous. She's not a doctor. The doctors didn't help, Shaw argued, his newly discovered voice gaining confidence with each word. They just made me scared. Oliver flinched at that truth, at the realization that years of specialists and procedures had traumatized his son without helping him. He rose slowly and walked to the window, hands clasped behind his back as he stared out at the manicured gardens. For a long moment, he said nothing. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, softer, almost contemplative. Do you know what my wife's last words were supposed to be? He didn't turn around. She was trying to tell me something as she died, but I couldn't hear her. Her voice was too weak, and I was too broken. He pressed his palm against the glass. For 8 years, I've wondered what she wanted to say. Was it about Shaw? Was it something I was supposed to do? Was it simply I love you? I'll never know. He turned back to us. And all this time, my son has lived in that same uncertainty, watching lips move, knowing words are being spoken, but never hearing them. His eyes met mine. Until you. I waited, heart hammering against my ribs. The doctors have confirmed there's no damage, he continued. Shaw's hearing is nearly perfect. The infection is responding to antibiotics. In a few weeks, it will be as if he was never deaf at all. Except for the 8 years he's lost, I said softly. Oliver nodded, pain etching new lines around his eyes. 8 years I can never give back to him. He ran a hand through his hair. Do you know what this means legally? What you did? Yes. I straightened my shoulders. I practiced medicine without a license. I acted without parental consent. I interfered with established medical protocol. I paused. And I gave your son his hearing back when everyone else had failed him. For the first time, something like a smile touched Oliver's lips. Yes. You did. He crossed the room to a small desk, opened a drawer, and removed a checkbook, the old-fashioned kind that billionaires apparently still used. You're fired, he said, scribbling something. My heart plummeted. Despite everything, despite the miracle, I was still losing my job. My grandmother. Obviously, you can't continue as a maid, he clarified, tearing out the check. Not with what you've shown you're capable of. He handed me the check. I looked down and nearly collapsed. $1 million. Mr. Hart, I gasped. That should cover your grandmother's care for the rest of her life, he said matter-of-factly. Consider it severance pay. I couldn't speak. Couldn't breathe. The paper trembled in my hands. And this, he continued, pulling an envelope from his pocket, is something else. An acceptance letter to the Johns Hopkins School of Medicine. Full scholarship. I looked up in confusion. I don't understand. I made some calls on the flight home, he explained. Pulled some strings. The medical world owes me a few favors after what they've put my family through. His expression softened. You have a gift, Victoria. An ability to see what others miss. To act when others hesitate. The world needs more healers like you, official ones, with proper training. But I don't even have a bachelor's degree, I stammered. Hence that strings pulled, he replied with a slight shrug. You'll start with a special preparatory program, then transition into the standard curriculum. It won't be easy, but I suspect you don't shy away from challenges. Shaw, who had been listening intently, suddenly broke into a wide grin. You're going to be a doctor. If she wants to be, Oliver amended, looking at me questioningly. Did I want to be? The thought had never seemed possible, not for a girl from Newark with no money, no connections, no path forward except the one carved through sheer determination and faith. Yes, I whispered, then stronger, yes. I want that more than anything. Good. Oliver nodded, satisfied. There's one condition, though. Of course there was. Nothing came without strings, especially from the wealthy and powerful. You'll continue to live here, he said, surprising me completely. In the East Wing, not the staff quarters. You'll study, prepare for medical school, and, he glanced at his son, who was practically vibrating with anticipation, you'll help Shot adjust to his new world of sound. Speech therapy, hearing calibration, all of it. The specialists will lead, but he trusts you. He needs that trust right now. I looked at Shaw, who was nodding enthusiastically, then back at Oliver. You want me to stay? After what I did. Because of what you did, he corrected. Because you saw my son when everyone else, including me, only saw a problem. Tears blurred my vision. Thank you, I whispered. Don't thank me yet, he warned, though his tone had lightened. Medical school is brutal, and Shaw's adjustment won't be easy. There will be days you'll wish you were just cleaning floors again. No, there won't, I said with certainty. Oliver's expression softened further. No. I don't suppose there will be. That evening, I sat on the porch of the Hart mansion, watching the sunset paint the sky in colors I didn't have names for. My grandmother was on the phone, sobbing with joy as I explained the miracle that had unfolded, not just for Shaw, but for both of us. I told you, she kept saying through her tears. I told you God doesn't place us somewhere by accident. As we talked, the porch door opened, and Shaw stepped out, a small music player in his hands. He sat beside me, legs dangling through the railing slats. "What are you listening to?" I asked as I ended the call with my grandmother. "Everything," he replied with a smile that could have lit up the darkening sky. "Dad found Mom's favorite songs," he said, his voice caught slightly. "He said she used to sing to me before I was born. That I might remember the feeling, even if I didn't remember the sound." He offered me one of his earbuds. I took it, and the gentle melody of a lullaby filled my ear, the same ear that had somehow recognized what was wrong with his. We sat there as stars appeared, a boy hearing his mother's favorite songs for the first time and a woman whose life had been transformed by the simple act of paying attention. Footsteps approached from behind. Oliver joined us, sitting on Shaw's other side. For a while, none of us spoke. We didn't need to. The music said everything, about loss, about love, about second chances that come when you least expect them. "She would have liked you," Oliver said finally, his voice barely audible above the melody. "Catherine," I replied, remembering the name of the woman in the portraits that lined the hallways. He nodded. "She believed in miracles. I stopped believing when she died." He looked at his son, who was leaning against my shoulder, eyes closed as he absorbed the music. I was wrong. As darkness settled around us, I thought about the journey that had brought me here, from desperate job seeker to miracle worker to future medical student. None of it made sense by the world's logic. All of it made perfect sense by faith's measure. "Victoria?" Shaw's sleepy voice broke into my thoughts. "Yes?" "Thank you for hearing me when I couldn't hear myself." I pulled him closer, my heart so full it felt like it might burst. "That's what we're all looking for, isn't it?" I whispered. "Someone who hears the words we cannot say." Over his head, my eyes met Oliver's. Something passed between us, understanding, gratitude, perhaps even the beginning of friendship. We were three broken people who, together, had found a kind of healing that transcended physical medicine. The miracle wasn't just that Shaw could hear, it was that all of us had finally been heard. 2 months later, I stood in the auditorium of Shaw's school, watching him walk onto the stage for the winter concert. No interpreter at his side, no special accommodations, just a boy with a voice ready to join the chorus. As the music began and Shaw started to sing, his voice clear and confident among his classmates, I felt Oliver's hand find mine in the darkness of the audience. We held on tight, witnesses to a miracle that had begun with something as simple as truly seeing a child in pain. The billionaire and the maid, forever connected by the boy who now sang between two worlds, the silent one he'd left behind, and the symphony he discovered with the help of someone who refused to accept that some things cannot be fixed. Sometimes the most profound healing comes not from expensive specialists or cutting-edge technology, but from willing hands guided by a loving heart. And sometimes those hands belong to the person you'd least expect. Has someone unexpectedly changed your life when you needed it most? I'd love to hear your story in the comments below. If this journey touched your heart, please subscribe to this channel for more stories of hope, healing, and the miracles that happen when we truly see each other. Remember, sometimes the greatest gifts come from the most unlikely sources, we just have to be willing to notice.